to give a brief overview of the chapter. This is chapter 4. It's called The Reach. This chapter is about Bob Goff when he had his first real job, he calls it, in Laird's Greenhouse Restaurant, and talks about how he spent a year being a busboy, doing all this stuff to work his way up until he could finally be the waiter. And it's a super high-end restaurant. I mean, just like what you can imagine a high-end restaurant being like, you know, twinkle lights and glass ceilings and really expensive food, and so it's a pretty big deal, and the waiters wear tuxes. So he goes out, buys his tux, he's ready for his very first day as a server, and he runs quick to get some Mexican food. That's important. He runs to get some Mexican food right before his shift, and he eats quickly, and then his very first table, really rich looking people. They sit down, he puts the napkins on their laps, and everything's going really well. And he takes their order, that goes well, and then he comes to bring the food. Well, he mentions earlier in the chapter how these tables were kind of large tables higher up, and they were hard to reach across to pass out all the food. So, on page, I will direct quote him.
Yes, do it.
This, let's see what page here.
27.
Page 27, it says, I placed their orders and after a short time came back to the gazebo with the steaming plates. All seemed to be going well until the unthinkable happened. As I was making the big reach across the wide table, I felt this massive grumbling somewhere south of my stomach, down as deep as one could imagine. There was no time to react. At the pinnacle of my full extension across the table with a plate of prime rib, out came the most impressive and lengthy gassing you can ever imagine. I hardly had time to regret the Mexican food I'd eaten earlier. And then the best part is the last sentence when he says, no amount of butt tightening would put an end to it. So it turns out to be an extremely embarrassing situation. Obviously, everybody could have sounded out the whole alphabet. So everybody hears it. The man, the guest at the table gets up, goes and tells the maitre d', and then he gets fired on the spot and ends up being a huge failure when he thought he was going to be a huge success.
Yes, that is a great recap.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to quote the very beginning of the chapter. I used to be afraid of failing at something that really mattered to me, but now I'm more afraid of succeeding at things that don't matter. What are your thoughts on that? And because after he farts and gets fired, he says, I knew even then that it had indeed been an amazing, if not flawless night.
I think when he says, like, succeeding at things that don't matter, I think in the whole, like the whole view of your life, when you've succeeded at things, it might not feel like it matters because the things that you failed at were actually the things that shaped your character the most, you know? So it's not like being successful is a bad thing. I mean, God is in that too, you know, He helps us be successful, but it just doesn't always seem to matter as much when the things that have actually shaped us are the things that have been through failure, you know? So those things seem to actually matter more and become more of what makes us who we are.
Yes, I mean, we're talking perspective, essentially, aren't we? You know, what do we perceive as failure? What do we perceive as success?
Mm-hmm.
And, what do you guys think the biggest enemy to love is? Like, to you loving someone else, what's the greatest hindrance? Fear. You know, the Bible talks about how perfect love casts out fear. And I think when fear is at the root of something, or fear is your perspective, fear is the motivator, then, you know, success looks different.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He's got this great quote, you know, I didn't write down the page, but, maybe 29, maybe.
Yeah.
The thing I love about God is He intentionally guides people into failure. That would be really offensive to some Christians, so I'm just going to say it again.
Yeah.
Because I want to. The thing I love about God is He intentionally guides people into failure. He made us be born as little kids who can't walk or talk or even use a bathroom correctly. We have to be taught everything.
Yeah.
All that, I can't read my own writing.
Learning.
All that learning, takes time. And He made us so we are dependent on Him, our parents, and each other. The whole thing is designed so that we try again and again until we finally get it right. And the whole time He is endlessly patient, which I think is great. It's kind of like a little bit of a theme running through the night, is that God is so patient with us, and we are such a mess, and we are so impatient with ourselves. We give up before He would never give up on us, and we give up on ourselves. So we just, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. I failed. I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why? Why not try again?
Right.
Like that. I love His perspective of, hey, why not try again?
Yeah.
You know, I'll do better next time, or maybe that was the place I was meant to be. Cool. Let's move on. Like we lock ourselves up so much because maybe we just think we're failures. Maybe we're judging ourselves.
Right.
Maybe we're just over it. We just can't. I don't wanna. I'm just done.
Right.
I'm just not even gonna try. I'm not gonna engage. And that's kind of like the whole point of this book is love engages. Love is action. Love does. You know. And I think it's good to. It will help to not lock ourselves up if we have a different perspective on things.
Right.
You know.
Yep.
What is actual success in my life, and don't expect to be walking when I'm a baby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is the season I'm in. God's patient with me here, and it's a season, which means I'm walking with God, which means it's growing.
Yeah.
Like it does. Wintertime is wintertime, but tomorrow is one day closer to spring. Still winter. You know, and we're so impatient with ourselves, and we're so hard on ourselves. And if we have God's perspective on things, we would just back off ourselves a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, like
Right.
take it easy.
Right.
God's bringing growth. You live with yourself every moment. It's a season. You're a baby, now you're crawling, and now you're walking. And when
Right.
you're away from the person for a little while, you come back, you're like, whoa,
Right.
my niece is 2 and she talks now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm used to her being a baby.
Yeah.
I just think we
It's crazy.
just gotta, God doesn't mind messy, and we do.
Yeah. It's true.
And we just need to get over it.
Yeah.
Because we would grow a lot faster if we were fine with it too.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you
Like-
were
Oh, go ahead. No, you go.
sorry. When you were reading that, it made me think about failing. And I don't really think failing is failing necessarily. I think it's more like learning in a different way than you wanted to learn. Or than you expected to learn.
Nicely put.
So if you think about it that way, you're not really failing, you're just learning a little differently. And
Yeah.
different is okay.
Yeah.
So that kind of changes your perspective
It
on
really
failing.
does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
I read this thing on Facebook. You know, all those like weird lists that are going around. It's like the 12 things Christians should never say. And one of them said, you should never say, God will never give you more than you can handle. And the reason they were saying that you should never say that is because the truth is God does sometimes give us more than we can handle, not in a mean way, but in a way to say, hey, you need me. Be dependent on me, you know?
Yeah.
And like the actual verse is, He doesn't tempt us beyond what we can bear.
Yes,
So
right.
it's totally taken out of context,
Yes.
really. So it's like, God does give us more than we can handle because it's not about us. It's about God. It's about doing this as a relationship and not trying to do it all ourselves, because
Yes.
that is going to result in failure and a hurting kind of failure, because then you're wrapped up in yourself so much that you've actually hurt your pride and you know, all this other stuff goes wrong.
Because what do you learn when you do something right all the time?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
I can't even think of one thing right now.
You learn self-reliance, essentially, don't you?
Yeah.
You know, like if you could, like,
Mhm.
if you could live in your own strength at all times without ever having to rely on God,
Mhm.
that's not a life of faith.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You're just relying on yourself.
Yeah.
And then when something falls apart, okay, so I have money, so I'm going to rely on my money for things. What happens when it all goes away? You know, where is my security in that?
Right.
Or is my faith in God, you know? And if He asks me to do something that's beyond my capacity, good.
Yeah.
Now I have to rely on Him. Like in my experience with the Lord, that's pretty much always the place He wants me in. You know, whether I choose to be there or not, choose to live in that place or not, that's your choice.
Yeah.
You know, your choice of trust and obedience, but that's the excitement of living with the Lord and growth.
Yeah.
You know, you can choose to not, but why would you?
Right. Right.
You know? This other thing too that struck me about this chapter, because he also talks about Jesus' disciples.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people, in looking at the end of Jesus' life, so he's not risen from the dead yet, but he's dead.
Mm-hmm.
How many people would look at that life and say this is a success?
No.
I mean, you've got
Yeah.
all your disciples have walked away. Most of them don't even get what just happened.
Yeah.
You know? You've been pouring your life into these people for 3 straight years, full of the Holy Spirit and your God in flesh. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right. Yep.
And your ministry, your love for people, it could all be looked at as a failure because they rejected you they killed you, and everybody walked away.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Right.
But he, even at that moment, his life would not be seen as a failure to him or to God. I know he is God. I know this is a little semantical, but because he lived a life of obedience.
Right.
So regardless of the outcome, if it looks successful or not,
Yeah.
it is successful when you live a life of obedience.
That's right.
Because
Yeah.
God will produce the fruits he wants. It's almost like this big chess game, and you only see a little piece of it, you know? But he sees all of it, and he moves the pieces where he needs them, when he needs them to accomplish his purposes. And if you trust that God is big enough and sovereign, good, loving, powerful, if you actually trust who God is, it's not a question to be obedient. You just do.
Right.
And you don't worry about if it looks successful or not, because it is. You know?
Yeah.
But that's a perspective thing again, isn't it?
Yep, and I had that thought the other night too. Some of us were just praying together, and we were just praying about God's faithfulness, and I was just thinking that we don't actually know faithfulness anywhere on earth. We don't know faithfulness in a single person or a single thing. There's no faithfulness except for in God. And how different Christian lives would be if we actually believed in a faithful God. And a God who would never disappoint us and never steer us the wrong way and
Yes.
could be completely trustworthy. How different would our Christian walks be if we completely believed in a faithful God? And I know I don't. You know, I know it's something that God is showing me and instilling in me more. And it's like, oh, when I think about it that way, I just want it. I want to live a life where I always see God as faithful, no matter what is happening in the present moment, no matter what, just happened. And but God is, to know He's always faithful and what that actually means. You can only go to the Bible. You can only look at the Bible. You can't compare it to another person. And that's what people do so often when they talk about being let down or not trusting God. It's because they're comparing their own understanding, and I know I've done this, of faithfulness and trustworthiness to somebody who's let them down. So if it's all you know, you just put it in that box, and you must say, well, this is what I know of faithfulness, and now this must be what God is. No, you have to start with God, and you have to start with the Word of God and say, what does the Bible say about God's faithfulness? That's who He is, regardless if I've ever seen it before. Because you haven't. You've never seen faithfulness except for in God, because it's one of His traits. It's who He is,
Yeah.